right, it's a great pleasure to be here in Pittsburgh. I want to start off, if you'll just indulge me, we lost two of the absolutely great visionary planners this year. We lost Hank Dittmar and we lost John Fregonesi. I know many of you knew them as I did, and I just couldn't come up here and say some of the things I'm going to say without acknowledging. I don't think any of us would even be in this room without their tremendous contributions, and I miss them a lot. But what I really want to focus on is for those of you that are under 40 years old, I'd like to ask you to stand up just a second. If you are under 40. See, that's what I thought. And as much as I love the old lions of our industry, this talk is for you. No pressure, but I have the ultimate confidence that you guys are the ones that are going to take us all the way to the next level. So, I come from Texas. Some of you will recognize these gentlemen. That's Ted Cruz, the junior senator from Texas on the left. And that is, no booing. This is not a partisan thing, even though it's early voting where I live and midterms and all that. The other gentleman is Beto O'Rourke. I put this picture up here not just to center me in the sort of political environment that I live in, but to say these guys agree on absolutely nothing. There's not a single issue except for one. There's one thing that they actually agree on. It's a little bit of a twist, but they actually agree on high-speed rail. Beto is from El Paso. El Paso is 80% Latino. It's a border city, one of the safest cities in the US. It also is a city that has a cool streetcar system coming on, as some of you would know. Beto, we're good. We know he's for transit. Everybody understands that. What people don't know is old Ted Cruz is also for transit. He's all about that big Japanese-funded Texas super rail system. He's all for it as long as the private sector pays for it. There's just a little difference between them, but basically, they're in the sweet spot. I wanted to start off talking about politics just for a second, because the message here is what I really need us to do is go as far past politics as we can humanly get today. I understand that absolutely to the core of any discussion about rail is a discussion about local politics, state politics, federal politics, and even global politics. I get that, but my challenge for us is we can't stay there. It's too negative, it's too divisive. We have to vote, we have to get the right people elected. I'm not saying tune that out. I'm just saying as passionate rail people, we need to understand if we stay in the vortex of politics, we will never get where we're capable of going. And I really want you to take that in very deeply. I'm dead serious. We have to take care of business on politics, but our main job, the main thing I'm counting on you next generation under 40s to do, where you need to carry the ball, is so far past what passes for political discourse at this point in our history. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to put some props out while we're on the one and only political page of my deck. I do want to say how much I appreciated the mayor of Pittsburgh's remarks. I haven't been to Pittsburgh since the 1980s. Back then, this was the rustiest Rust Belt, coal mining. This city was not a fun city to travel to the last time I came here. It was in the kind of like that, the dying throes of what the old school Rust Belt cities were experiencing. And it's such a joy to come back here and see the vibrancy, see how much reinvention has already happened and how much is coming down the pipeline. It's so perfect that we're having Rail Volution here in this city in the spirit of reinvention. Okay. Don't try to read this chart just yet. I'll help you with it. I realize it's a little overcomplicated. 15 years ago, when I got out of the high-tech market and started working in the field of sustainability the night my son was born, I looked right in his eyes, I looked at his 15-year-old birth mother's eyes, and I was like, I cannot continue to be a high-tech exec floating around the high-tech world. I have to get in and do my part for sustainability, or I'll never be able to look them in the eye. And shortly after that, Rail Volution board member Shelley Peticha asked me to come to a meeting in San Francisco with rail advocates at the time, and the meeting went on and on and on, and she finally said, well, Robin, what do you think? And I said, I think transit is the worst framed issue in America. And that wasn't a super popular stay in your comfort zone thing to say back then. And the thing that worries me, even though we've made a lot of progress since then, I still think I will stand here with my boots on and loving y'all and cheering you from the depths of my soul. I will stand here and say, I still think transit is the worst framed issue in America by far. A poll that I did for NRDC showed what I think is at the core of the problem with the framing. We looked at 15 different issues, and the point was, what is the gap between people feeling like an issue is important to them personally, and then do they think it's important to their community? And you had some issues, like clean water and renewable energy, where the gap between personally important and community importance was like only 5 or 6 points. Who wants to guess? I will give a $100 bonus for who can guess what the gap was on transit. Any guesses? Not 80, but okay. Made your point. It was actually 38 points. It was the second to the bottom. And I'm saying this because we're capable of framing the heck out of everything that has to do with multimodal, including rail, including transit, all of the interesting things that are coming up these days. We're more than capable of the rocket science things we have to do. Framing our passion should not be that difficult, but yet we have yet to do it. We have yet to do it. This chart that's in front of you, it's from the Pew Research Center just a couple months ago. The top priorities in urban, suburban, and rural contexts. Number one issue, opioids. I just want y'all to take that in for just a second. The number one issue in a lot of places is drug addiction. When I see drug addiction as an issue, as a priority issue, I'm not thinking about big pharma and all the evil things that they might be doing. I'm thinking about despair. I'm thinking about people that are so economically disadvantaged, so down about their circumstances, so down about the future, that they're picking a cope like drug addiction. And you might be saying, wow, she said she was going to take us out of our comfort zone, but drawing the link between drug addiction and transit, now I don't know about this level of discomfort. But I want you to understand, the next one is affordable housing, availability of jobs. Look at the rural, that green line is urban, the yellow suburban. Look how big that access to public transportation is for rural folks. Okay? When you look at what the priorities are and what they aren't, you have to say, are we framing ourselves in the way that presents us in the best possible light? We'll be talking about that. Now, I'm supposed to talk about MAGA, but I refuse to talk about Trump in this keynote presentation. So, and the reason for that is it's incredibly divisive. And one of the themes I'm trying to get you guys to focus on is all about how does multimodal, how do these transit solutions, how do they actually serve the purpose of unifying us? That's actually one of our biggest challenges, one of our biggest goals. If we could break the code on that, there's nothing that could hold us back. Right now, we're too often in the divisive vortex of negativity. We have to stay out of it. But remember that what really led to the current situation in the national political sort of scheme is this definition of MAGA: make all my despair go away. You have a lot of people with very little economic anything, and especially no economic hope for their kids. It used to be you could come to this country or be born in this country and you understood you were going to have to work hard and you probably wouldn't have anything at the end of the day. But you could look at your kids and say, they're going to get an education, they're going to go to college, and I might not get the big economic hope, but they will. And the biggest problem we have as a country right now is that went away. That's part of what's leading to the despair. This is a poll I did for the American Planning Association a couple years back. It's a very simple question. Some people see the US economy as fundamentally sound, and others think it's fundamentally flawed. Which is closer to your belief? This shocked the clients of this poll. This was consistent across rural, suburban, and urban. It was consistent across Republican and Democrat. It was very consistent across younger and older generations. People understand that the American economy is not playing out the way that it used to. We don't have that middle class robustness that got our parents and the generation before them, that got a lot of Americans through the day. And I'm not laying any blame on that, but as transit professionals, we really have to understand the economic security that we had. Most people think it's gone and not coming back. That explains a lot of things. It does explain everything from drug addiction to the way people think about government. Market forces, this is a chart from that same poll. This is one of my favorite charts ever. The question was, do you think market forces alone are enough to transform the economy or not? No one thinks, literally no one in any category that we polled on, Republican, Democrat, suburban, rural, no one thinks that market forces are going to magically fix the economy. No one thinks that. What's scary is there's no trust in government to do it either. This is the erosion of public trust in government from 1958, the year I was born, 100 years ago, to today. That little bump that you see was right around 9/11, when the country came together for about a year or so. There was an idea that we could pull together, and it quickly evaporated, especially after 2008. So the challenge then is, well, market forces alone are going to take care of this thing, and the government's not going to take care of this thing. Well, who's going to do it? And guess what my answer is? Us. Us. I'm going to say it again, us. If anyone is going to restore faith and get the positive economic future, a bold vision of the future, if anyone's going to get that going on, it isn't going to be the elected officials, even the best of the best elected officials. The biggest problem we have politically is there are no elected officials anywhere, federal, state, or local, that are putting out a positive, bold vision of the future that people think is credible and are excited about. Can you think of anybody doing that? It's a huge problem on all sides. This is not one party's problem or another. This is our problem. And what's interesting is I think we can do it. I'm not scared of it. Let me define what's winning from my point of view. This is a very technical definition. I think what's winning for us is winning the hearts and minds nationally and in every discrete community, winning the hearts and minds that transit and rail, all the multimodal good stuff, it's important both for my community and me. I'd like us to be at that 5-point gap and knock this 38-point gap out. I'd like us to have a positive, inclusive, bold vision of the American future that isn't possible without multimodal solutions, transit, rail, all of that good stuff. We should be saying, if you want to go forward in a positive way, transit and rail multimodal is the core, is the essential ingredient. If we do that, we should be able to get more than enough funding from every level, including the private sector, to do whatever it is that we need to do. And I am a competitive person. I played basketball. I think winning is easily vanquishing our enemies. And yes, we do have enemies. We have enemies that are spending billions of dollars trying to squash a positive vision of transit. If you don't believe me, come see my friends in Nashville. I'm not going to give the long version of what are our enemies and how much are they spending and why are they winning sometimes. But to me, winning, we have to dream a bigger dream about winning. I want there to be a national knowing, a national understanding to the core that there is a positive future out there and that transit is what makes it possible. And I fully believe if we do that, our enemies, they have nothing. They have no game if we're capable of doing that and we do that to the level where, that's possible for us. So, first of all, I do want to say I think Rail Volution did a fantastic job this year at addressing the many levels of equity that are challenging us right now. Maria Zimmerman did a great panel this morning with the Elevate Chicago folks talking about displacement, talking about what gentrification, talking about the sort of deep listening challenges that we've had and how to get past this place where we are. So I really appreciate that. This is my top 10, the absolute essentials community checklist. And if you look at it, you not only have to be great at listening, and you have to be great at focusing on people and not just the project, you got to actually design a system that reflects that. Those two things alone would be unbelievably hard, right? But then you've got to inspire all these key audiences, you've got to get your elected officials and your key influencers on board, you got to get your base fired up, you got to get the rest of the grassroots groups fired up, you've got to get your business leaders on board, you've got to anticipate when the opponents, what they'll do. That's not hard. Our enemies are pretty straightforward. You can see them coming and you know what they're going to do. That's not the hard part. You just keep doing that. I think what happens is we get good at a couple of these things. Let me take Nashville again. Nashville was very, very good at number 4. I've never seen 10 counties, elected officials in their region were so fired up about transit and rail. Their mayors, their county commissioners, they went to Denver, they came back, and they never stopped talking about rail again. The problem was they did not get the rest of that checklist done. They had polling that showed them the rest of your checklist isn't done. This is not going to go well. People have blamed the election in Nashville on the mayor and the scandal that she had, which was a total catastrophe. But that is not what sunk that campaign. What sunk that campaign is they didn't have the whole enchilada going on. They had a few things where they were really off the charts, but a lot of what happened there, and it's a shame it's really unbelievable to me that Nashville, one of the most amazing cities in America, they did a lot of things right, but they didn't do the whole thing right. And we can talk more about that if you want in a second. I just want to make a point. Urban living is not the ideal for most people in America. It's not the ideal for the young generation necessarily. It's not the most popular idea out there by far. This chart, I'm not going to go through it because we're a little tight on time, but there is a big difference between the way conservative constituents want to live and the way more liberal constituents want to live in terms of density, walkability, and livability. We're missing the mark, especially with 3 audiences in my mind. I think we're still missing the mark with the millennials. We're definitely missing the mark with rural communities, and we are off the charts terrible. And I say that, again, lovingly and respectfully. We're still off the charts terrible most of the time with communities of color and low-income communities. these are the problems we have in framing transit. We have been sticking with the smart growth 1990s framing, and it's killing us, in my humble opinion. It's choking us. Talking about sprawl, talking about all those things that in the 90s made sense because we still had our national optimism back in the 90s. We don't have that anymore, and to talk about that, you're losing vast, vast pieces of our necessary audience. One of our biggest problems, maybe the biggest problem, is even though we're getting better at talking about equity, we're still too often continuing the patterns of systemic racism. Most of the time, we don't understand that we're doing that because we're trying to get developers to invest in our project, in our corridors. And we're not understanding that oftentimes we get that development interest that it's taken us 25 years to get them on board, but we're losing entire communities, and we cannot continue doing that. We don't have cultural competence yet as a professional community, period, the end. We continually focus on placemaking maps and stats instead of really focusing on people and connection. And like I said, we're not communicating a unifying, bold vision of the future. So what should we do? Quit focusing exclusively on cities. If you could just do one thing, this is what I'm asking. I understand we're in love with cities. I understand cities are better for us because cities often have progressive mayors and we can get more of our agenda done. Focusing on cities is leaving out too many people. Most people don't want to live in a downtown loft. And if we're constantly focusing on that as the ideal, we're just losing people. We need to stop focusing on placemaking and focus on people making. The lexicon about sprawl already said that needs to go, and what we need to not replace the sprawl talk with is this whole geeky smart cities, that stuff, it's worse than the sprawl stuff. People don't understand it. It makes them feel very uncomfortable. We have to get over that. So here's what I think we should be doing. Focus on people. Focus on transit as the solution to rebuilding the middle class. Actually fund and implement the great equity recommendations that lots of regions and cities are starting to put out. I'm seeing lots of really good reports on equity and what we should do. I'm not seeing as much funding and implementing and actually getting it done. It's almost like it's an afterthought. Oh, here's our plan, now we need to tack on our equity report to raise awareness. No, it's funding and implementation now. Thank you. Transportation is freedom. Transportation is economic mobility. These are my people in Austin. These are my friends. That's my former mayor, two of my favorite council people ever, the chair of the Sierra Club. They're standing there with the worst message about transit I've ever seen. It says traffic bites bite back. This is what that got us. Framing and messaging really, really matters. And no, it's not about traffic. No, it's not even about walkability. This is, that messaging from Austin was from a few years back. This messaging that I'm going to show you in just a second is from last week. Okay, this is a new system map that we have. And this is the new CEO of Cap Metro. And what he put out was the new vision doesn't have light rail in it. It has driverless buses. I'm hearing total silence. The message of the new head of Cap Metro in my home city, which I love, and I love this guy, I want him to win, but the message was, we're not doing light rail anymore, we're going to do buses with no drivers. I can't describe for you the thud. This poor guy, he just got to Austin like 5 minutes ago, they put this plan out, the whole focus is on buses with no drivers. No one's buying that. The existing base of transit advocates were horrified, and everyone else is like, I don't want to drive on a bus with no, I don't want my kid to get on a bus with no driver. What is that? What is that even about? Now I want to talk a little bit I'm all for innovation. Like, I love innovation. I spent 20 years in the tech market, right? But managing excitement versus completely freaking people out it's real. It sounds funny, and I know the youngest of the younger generation that are here are probably laughing, oh, those old funny-duddies. It's a problem. I picked this image, which I think is great, because we have all these incredible disruptive technologies coming in. It is very exciting. The possibilities that it's opening up are great, but you have to manage the user experience. You have to watch the overwhelm factor and a little more transition on, hey, this is how we used to do it, and now here are the new options. That would go a long way. 3 definition of social equity: the balance between urban, suburban, and rural, the balance for people of color and low-income communities, and the balance between mode share. When people talk about equity around the country, they may not be talking about what you think of as equity. There needs to be equity across all of these 3 definitions. What I see is a lot of lip service and not quite enough actual action. The issue of racial and social justice equity in transit goes all the way back to the 60s. And I guess if you don't remember anything else from this talk, I really feel like if we don't get the social justice right on transit, if we don't start investing in the least advantaged communities, the communities that have had the worst of it up to this point, nothing else, I don't think anything else can happen that's right. To me, this is a moral issue. Everyone is well aware now of the actual consequences of disinvestment and displacement. There's no one in this room that can say, oops, I didn't see that coming. And if we can focus on this and not just talk about it and raise our awareness, but put our dollars behind it, the other goals that we have for ourselves are going to come a lot easier, because we're going to be able to rebuild the trust and the credibility that's been broken for way too long. So this is simple. Implement the recommendations already. These are some typical equity recommendations from one of the reports I referenced before. This is very doable. This takes time. It takes real deep listening, but it's extremely doable. I love this picture of the rural transit reality. It pretty much sums up what I think a lot of people that don't spend a lot of time in rural communities think. Rural communities, there's a real renaissance. As cities have gotten too expensive, more and more people are actually moving back to small towns. If you go to a state like Tennessee, my state of Texas, lots and lots of states, they're getting people from cities, and they're looking for amenities. They're looking for their transit. They're looking for multimodal options. Rural counties are 72% of our country if you look at it from a land perspective and not a people perspective. There are lots of families and kids. The next generation is also rural. There's a lot of kids and teenagers and college students in rural areas that we can connect with, that we can really, that can bring us along. This is my favorite quote from Wendell Berry. I'm not going to read it, but the way to talk about rural issues and the way to talk with rural people is not that hard. It's not a whole different language. It's the language, it's actually a common language. On the second paragraph, he says, if we can think again of reverence, humility, affection, familiarity, neighborliness, cooperation, thrift, local loyalty, these terms return us to the best of our heritage, and they bring us home. These rural millennials, they're doing a great job driving because they don't have any choices. We can do something about that. The last point I'll make is the topic of millennials is so popular among rail and transit people. I think the biggest issue with millennials is their sense of isolation. They're isolated. Their level of despair is actually quite profound. And if I were marketing to millennials, I would really focus a lot on these core communication themes. By the way, these themes also work with older audiences. These are the themes I think we have to kind of rally ourselves around. Relationships and people, community as a living network of people and nature, not places full of buildings. We need to really focus on the role of culture and the role of inclusivity. That's a central theme. Less disruption, more comfortable innovation, connection over isolation and despair. If you wanted me to net this whole talk, it's choices and connections equal a bold and secure future. And with that, I'll just say my wish, my heartfelt wish for you all, is that we get out of the mindset we got in the 90s. We get out of that kind of framing, and we take a big leap into the kind of framing that is not only good for transit, but is good for people and really good for our country.